Episode 9 Diamond Geysers. The hills are alive with the sound of mucus, and I can only apologize. Another gift from the disease that keeps on giving. Still, it kept the critters away, and it bodes well for a peaceful 2 hours of driving ahead of us. It's great that you saw the group of moose exactly where I said. It means we don't have to stop at the wildlife jams which punctuate the road to the southern entrance of Yellowstone National Park. At this time of year, there won't be many and they won't block the road. But in peak season the road can resemble one long traffic jam, with the added bonus that the vehicles in front are all deserted. As my mother's long-suffering driving instructor would say, "Are you parking it or abandoning it?" The same driving instructor who celebrated Mum's successful 6th test by doing an Irish jig around our car, ripping off the learner plates and singing, "Noel, Noel." I don't know whether he was more delighted that she had finally passed or that half a decade of attrition had come to an end. This was the first and last time I saw him. Judging by his wrinkles, I guessed he was in his mid-70s, but I suppose he could just as well have been 35. The wildlife parking starts with one driver pulling over. Driver 2 decides it's worth a look and takes her family down a slippery slope to the river. By the time the occupants of car number 5 follow suit, every other driver assumes this must be an opportunity to see one of the big 5. Grizzly, black bear, bison, moose, or elk. Think again, Sherlock. The best you can realistically hope for here is a couple of moose and its entourage of 100 mosquitoes. And as the thwarted explorers return waving and scratching to their vehicles, they see the driver of the first car wake up from his backseat slumber, stretch and drive blithely off, without a care in the world. We can do a lot better than that, so let's get to the park ahead of these suckers. There is still a long queue at the ranger's hut, but the traffic inside the park will be light. When it's our turn at the kiosk window, you can begin to see the reason for this apparent paradox. The rangers inside look like a bunch of retired professors and civil servants. This is because many of them are just that, as in all US national parks. Their job is threefold: to help the visitors appreciate the natural wonders, to keep the tourists safe, and to make sure they behave themselves. I may be a bit extreme in my views about litter. I think all litter louts should spend 10 years in a chain gang, picking up trash with their teeth, but you will not find a single scrap of the stuff here or in any other American national park. This might have something to do with those friendly, informative, charming folk with the funny hats. They are federal employees, agents who have the power to find and arrest, whose prominently holstered guns are not only for rogue grizzlies. If you thought that Yogi Bear was a documentary, you should watch and learn, unless you're too young to know about Yogi's Jellystone, in which case such multitasking may be beyond you. As for me, I am an expert. I can perform a task and balls it up, all at the same time. So if a ranger chooses to chat about the wonders of the park, showing you every detail on your excellent free map, you listen to them and wait until they're ready to sell you a ticket. By the time you get away, you will be eager to get out and share a bench with a few fellow gawkers to wait for Old Faithful to do its thing. You won't have to wait long, 13 minutes in fact. This is the first of many geysers, Not the most spectacular, but really the only place to start. By now you know all my obsessions, except possibly Manchester City, and that's more like a 62-year affliction. I promise to be brief, but it seems to me that there are two ways of describing very large areas like Yellowstone, and they're both rather silly. The first is the size of whales comparison. If you ever want to seriously piss off somebody Welsh, which I would never do, try saying something like the Sahara is 24 times the size of Wales, or Los Angeles is the same size as Wales. It isn't, by the way, but it is roughly the size of Belgium, Los Angeles, that is, not the Sahara. I'm with the Welsh on this one. It's not the comparison itself that's insulting, but the sheer relentless originality. Why is it always Wales? The second one is even dafter, something along the lines of it's so big it can be seen from space. It's usually said of something described as great, like the Barrier Reef, Wall of China or Rann of Kutch, but there are satellites in space that can see people anywhere outdoors, on Earth, and I suspect few of us would preface our names with great. That reminds me of the cheeky boy who was asked how far he could see. I can see the sun, he replied, and that's a long way away. But sometimes it is worth having a spy's eye view of our planet. Some things can only be appreciated from a distance. Like Michael Gove. We have already visited a volcano on our travels, but the one in Lanzarote is not on the same scale as Yellowstone. Neither is Mount St. Helens, Etna, Kilauea, or that unpronounceable one in Iceland.
Eyjafjallajökull.
Added together, they don't even come close. Yellowstone is all one volcano, and we are sitting here, watching our first geyser erupt.
Here we go.
Oblivious of the fact that this is the epicenter of the biggest volcano on Earth. We need to see it from space to understand it. I had enough problems with the scale of the Grand Canyon, but Yellowstone is unique. It is gigantic, it's humongous, it's the size of Wales, or not. Fortunately, another thing, it's not as dangerous. The savage volcanic heat is near the surface, but it won't cover you with lava or ash. You might get a little wet again, but this time the water will be pleasantly warm, like its human counterparts. Our supervolcano is simply letting off steam, but steam is a bit boring for Yellowstone, and it would smell strongly of sulfur, which is never a good thing. Sulfurous steam does escape from little holes dotted tastefully across the vast plain, but these are like sparklers at a fireworks show, something to keep the punters amused before the pyrotechnics begin. But this is not an ordinary volcano. This is God's chemistry set, and its medium is water. You'll see later what happens when streams come bubbling up to the surface. But first let's enjoy the floor show. Like its young relatives in Iceland, Yellowstone has lots of underground ponds and lakes, fed by copious amounts of rain and melted snow. Perhaps it's more helpful to call them natural reservoirs, as they are being reserved for something. Water is a precious thing, but it's not very versatile. On its own, all it can do is flow downhill, and it needs a lot of help from its old friend geography to make that look spectacular. But we humans are fascinated by anomalies, and water going in the opposite direction is rare in nature. Niagara Falls is pretty awesome, but would be eclipsed by Niagara Rises, or should it be Viagra, so when you see a stream of water suddenly shoot into the air. Sorry, once mentioned, the word Viagra is hard to forget. It is exciting enough. When the whole lake full does it up, our brains are once again on overload. You'll see what I mean soon, and perhaps you will think of a better phrase, but the best I can do is, does not compute. Seeing a geyser explode into the air is quite a sight on a flat TV screen. Experiencing it close up in glorious 3D is a different kettle of fish. But I hope you will agree by now that adding a fourth dimension helps us appreciate these natural wonders much more. Which is why the logical place to start is here at Old Faithful. Some of the geysers have relatively small underground reservoirs, so the water will heat up quicker and will erupt more frequently. Old Faithful is only small by Yellowstone standards. The water performs at regular intervals. There's a timetable over there. That's how it got its name. You can rely on it. You can even set your watch by it. But I wouldn't do it before a job interview. Now let's make our way to one of its big brothers. Sorry if I sound a bit chauvinist making the aptly named Grand Geyser male, but in my mind, he is definitely masculine, for reasons I would rather not go into again. Old GG is a very different style of geyser, with a huge store of water, which also has its own lake on the surface. That nice ranger wrote the time of the expected liftoff on our map, but with the big boys, this is not an exact science. They are less punctual and perform less frequently. The daddy of them all hasn't shown signs of life since the 19th century, so we won't be waiting there. Instead, let's sit here next to this family and see what happens. The sign gives the expected times, with a warning that we may need to be patient. We do not. Almost immediately a thin jet of steaming water heralds the start of the show, then a fountain to put Chatsworth to shame draws "woo" from the tiny audience. If that's it, nobody would go away disappointed, but when it comes, the big reveal is sudden and unexpected. Half a lake full explodes upwards and, even more unnervingly, keeps going for ages. Someone says OMG, I cannot improve on that. When the water finally dies down, we sit there in stunned silence until it's time to move on to the next geyser. But it would be a mistake to think that Yellowstone is all about the physics. There is also some pretty damned impressive geography and biology going on here, not to mention the chemistry I hinted at earlier. In the next 2 days, you will have time to wander round at your own pace and see what you want to. I am sure that will include Yellowstone Canyon, and hopefully you will catch a glimpse of a grizzly. Remember, grizzly bears are grey, hence the name, but they can be black or brown, whereas black bears are always black, except when they're brown or grey. For today, let's just talk about the chemistry. At school, it was my second least favourite subject, after maths, but surprisingly ahead of games, which was taught by sadists in tight shorts who made us swim naked. I won't go into my travails with maths, except to say that it was a subject I should have excelled at if I hadn't alienated the teachers by claiming that there is no such thing as algebra. I know this was a foolish stance, and I have mellowed over the last half-century to realize that there is indeed such a thing as algebra, but there shouldn't be. Let X be 283, I still hear them say. Those chalky-gowned fundamentalists, why the hell should we? Why not let 283 just be 283? It will be happier and have a less conflicted life. It may have been useful in medieval Damascus to have letters representing numbers, but we have machines for that now. Chemistry was an altogether different affair. Like the rest of Professor Waller's classes, We were forced to play our part in his self-referential, hermetically sealed chemistry bubble. The reason it was so dull was that he was uniquely gifted in both chemistry and communication. Not another paradox, I assure you. The problem was that he had already said everything worth saying on the subject in 1922, when he had published his book. Like the Lord of the Rings, he had invested all his power and knowledge into one artifact in order to rule the world. And he had succeeded. Wally, I mean, not Sauron. The rest of the world seemed to agree that the Prof's book was the last word on chemistry, and unfortunately so did he. Each chapter was introduced by an erudite essay, setting out the context and significance of the topic in hand, followed by a detailed account of everything worth knowing about it, and then a few little experiments plus some brief notes on what they taught us. And so he didn't teach us, that is. Homework was reading and wrote learning of chunks of the book. Lessons started with a test of what we remembered verbatim. There followed a lengthy reading from the book by the victim of the day. If the reading filled the remaining 90 minutes, we were relieved. Otherwise, we were due an experiment. Professor Wally clung onto his precious book like Gollum holding onto his ring while it slowly ate him up from the inside. But the roles in the classroom were clearly defined. The professor watched, the book did the teaching, and the pupils absorbed, like litmus paper. Unfortunately, we also had the duty of making the experiments work. No doubt the original intention was for young people to find out for themselves how the world of chemistry worked. Now, in the Wally Empire, the slaves repeated the experiments until the results matched the answers in the book. With Yellowstone as your teacher, you can learn far more naturally. A few minutes further on, we come across a cascade of multicolored stone steps with a small brook trickling down it. I will leave you to find out why the colors are so varied and what chemicals are associated with which color. Consider it an experiment if you like. I am not the controlling type, and anyway, I am as colorblind as a color bat, but even that has its uses. I was the first to spot the elk skittering and sliding across the rocky ledges like a celebrity on ice. And then there's the macrobiotic crust, not a vegan sandwich shop, but the reason we need a boardwalk. We will take our time on the way back, reading the information boards and discovering a little about the strange and fragile world half a meter beneath our feet. There are theories about how this flat expanse of cooled volcanic matter and mineral-rich springs provided the conditions for the creation of life millions of years ago. The leap from inanimate to the animate, from chemistry to biology, that's not something I can comment on. I am happy to sit on the fence, as long as someone lifts me up there and down again. What I am able to say is we have covered a lot of time, ranging from a few minutes right back to the dawn of life on Earth. Now that's some fourth dimension, and now we have our own 4D experience to finish. It will only take a couple of hours to get back to Jackson Hole. It will be dark by then, but there will be plenty of time for a steak or veggie stir-fry. It's hard to believe that this is the same day that started with a freezing flood and no breakfast, and people say they don't understand the relativity of time. If you want to see what the estimable traveling Robert Morales made of his brief stay in Yellowstone, you can watch it from the link in the description below.